Hi, I'm Sylv, co-founder of Hylé, the lean blockchain for provable applications. On this podcast, we talk about cool applications that leverage cryptography in general and zero-knowledge proofs in particular, with a new guest every episode. Our guest today is David Amor, co-founder and CEO of Playmint, a team of games industry veterans building decentralized games. David and I met very early on in the onchain gaming scene, and I've always been amazed by their dedication to their craft. They do not veer off from their objective to give players unique affordances. They've spent 3 years building fully onchain games, where every action runs on the blockchain, putting players in charge, with Playmint designing the physics of the world. However, blockchain games face major hurdles: high costs, slow transactions, and challenges with hidden information. Realizing public blockchains weren't ideal, they developed a new, more decentralized, yet less blockchain-focused technology called Playerchains, and we're quite excited about it at Hylé. David and I couldn't stop yapping, so this episode will be split into two. Hope you will enjoy it. There we go. Hi there. So thank you very much for joining us on the Hylé Podcast today, David. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Nice to be here. Yeah, David Amor. I'm the CEO of a company called Playmint in the UK. Sort of game developers, or at least people that have made games in the more traditional games industry for some time, figuring out what's a new kind of game that you can build with decentralized technologies. So we've been doing that for the last 3 years. But our background is like PlayStation, Unity, Nintendo, that kind of stuff. So we're on a games industry side quest into decentralization. That's a very short intro.
I think one of the moments I realized that, oh damn, these guys are really good, is when I realized that you worked on Dungeon Keeper, right?
Oh yeah. I was working for a company called Bullfrog. As time goes on, less people know what that company is and what those games are, which is a shame. It's a sign of everyone getting a bit older, maybe. But for me, it was a very important and influential company that made some great games that I think are still great. Dungeon Keeper, Syndicate, Theme Park, Theme Hospital. It was a studio that had a great body of work. So, Sylv, I'm glad that that's a company that means something to you and a set of games that means something to you.
I played some of these, but I think the one game that you worked on that I played the most is a PlayStation game called Buzz.
Oh
Which is
yeah.
a quiz game. I played hours of that thing with my friends. That was really good. And you worked end to end on that thing, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a moral to it. I'll tell us a story, and because I think there's a moral to it, which was we were making PlayStation games for Sony, and I remember once going up to seeing Sony, what's going to be our next piece of work that we did for them, and they said, "Oh, we got a bunch of music clips. Maybe you could turn that into a quiz game." And I was thinking, "Oh God, well, we need the work, but like a quiz game, that's not even a proper game. That's not a game by my definition." And then we started to think, well, we need the work. So what are we going to build this into? And we got into it, and it ended up being, we really put our heart and soul into it. It ended up being the biggest game that I'd ever worked on, and people loved it. And it was a series of games, which was to anyone that doesn't know, it was a PlayStation 2 game that came with plastic buzzers, and it was just a lot of fun. It was designed for people to play when they were drunk and just having a good time, good party game. And the moral to that story, for me at least, is like there's always something new that you can build that people haven't seen before, and being narrow-minded as to what a game is can often limit the kind of things that you can build. So since then, I've been careful to expand my understanding of what a game can be. How did you play that game? Was it in a party environment? Is that right?
It's funny that you mentioned this because I was 15 years old.
Okay.
So it was a friend's birthday, and it's one of my very caring friends. So he used the custom quizzes section.
Yes.
He just created like a lot of custom questions that were absolutely hilarious. And it was great. It was like you were on a grand stage at Who Wants to Win $1 Million, but it was just questions about our teachers, our friends, like dirty secrets. It was just really fun. I never thought about like playing it again in a more of a party setup now that I'm more of an adult.
Yeah, I was
That's
going to say,
really fun.
I hope you weren't drunk at 15, but yeah, and that also taught me the power of user generated content. So, quick story there. We were put, I think we did like 5,000 questions in each game of Buzz, and we made at least 10 games of Buzz. So there was 50,000 questions that we'd written within a weekend. When we introduced that feature where you could write your own quiz questions, 50,000 questions were written in a weekend. And, you realize when millions of people are playing that game or anything, then the power of user-generated content is huge. And I think that's a story that we've seen a lot since in Minecraft, Roblox, Fortnite. All of these games are powered by user-generated content, and something I think a lot about when it comes to decentralized games. How can we put the power into the hands of the people that are creating the content? Because games where content is created by the players, not the game maker, seem to be more popular. Well, it's true of media in general, right? YouTube, TikTok, all their content is coming from the people using the platform. So, but to segue a little bit into decentralization, it seems like the people that are creating that content aren't the ones that are really benefiting. It seems like it's the platforms that are benefiting. Maybe me making PlayStation games where all the content was coming from generated questions, yet it was us, of course, that were benefiting by selling $60 PlayStation games. I don't know. Anyway, bit of a segue.
I think it's a really nice introduction into like the rest of the episode because people who know you because you're I would say a veteran of the gaming industry, and two, a veteran of the nascent on-chain gaming industry. And this power of user-generated content, I think it's a nice way also of introducing how we both know each other. And I think we can date this back to an NFT project called Loot. So Loot, for the people who don't know, was I want to say at the same time the greatest thing that ever happened on blockchain and the most underwhelming thing for people who were not in tune or who did not see the same thing. So Loot was an NFT project of 8,000 loot bags, exactly like how you would get them in a fantasy game. So you had a sword, boots, cloaks, weapons, but the particularity of Loot, I think it came out in 2020, 2021, I think.
21, yeah.
21, yeah. Built by Dom, one of the co-founders of Vine. And he just released the 8,000 loot bags. And it was a time where we had like a lot of PFP images, like the meta had already been created for NFTs. But the loot bags were just text. So you just get a loot bag, which is 8 strings, and that was it. And they got let loose. And it created two reactions, I think. On the one end, people going, I'm not buying a string on the blockchain. And second is, oh my God, this is absolutely brilliant. That was certainly one of the reasons we really got into the on-chainness for our previous project at Hylé, which was called Brick. And also you guys worked on the Crypt, I think.
And that was a game that used those same loot NFTs. I'm sort of attracted to new ideas in the games industry. And as you said, you can have two reactions. You can say, why on earth would I pay to buy a black square with white text on it? And that doesn't make any sense at all, particularly since at the time they were expensive to buy. And in a way, I think it's useful to separate the cost of that from the idea. The idea to me is much more interesting. The idea that you can buy something that can be used across a number of games, a number of experiences. And that's not possible in the traditional games industry. You don't buy a character that then you can use in Crash Bandicoot and FIFA. Like, it doesn't work that way. You can buy things in those games, but they sort of go down. You don't have a concept of owning an asset and then going up. And that's a new idea for the games industry. And like, I think that often interesting things happen in the games industry where new ideas are introduced. It could be around a business model or a design pattern or a piece of hardware, but it rarely stays still, the games industry, and often it comes from ideas such as that. And I still think that as an idea, the idea having an asset that can be used across different experiences in some way, I think is really interesting. And I think it's a lot of people will just say, "Oh, I can't take my gun from Fortnite and use it in Minecraft." And
Usual.
yeah, and I accept that, and I don't think you want to do that, but equally, I don't want to cut that idea short. I don't like the idea that all these games are in silos, or like, let's imagine a possibility where these games overlap in some way, and would that be more interesting? So I even though, it's easy to point of some shortcomings in that idea, I'm also not quick to throw it under a bus. I think there's something there. And as I say, it feels like my job in the games industry may be to uncover these things and figure out what new kind of experiences we can build, whether it's loot and interoperability or other ideas. And I think that, as you say, something that attracted us to this space, it felt like there was a new set of ideas in fully on-chain games, and they don't come around that frequently. It feels like about every 5 years in the games industry there's some new idea to build a new kind of experience with, and it felt like, particularly with fully on-chain games, there was 3 or 4 that were all worth investigating.
And you did build a lot of games. I would say that you're probably the most prolific team in the on-chain gaming space in terms of what you've built. You've built the Crypt. You've also built Downstream.
Yes.
If you want to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, in fact, I'll do the part. So the Crypt was a relatively simple game that involved collaborating with other people that held loot NFTs in order to beat our dungeons. And so a lot of the gameplay was actually finding people on the internet that had loot bags that you could form a team around and then compete. So it's a sort of that was the mechanic. Again, a new idea, I think, for the games industry. And then we also, after that, we ended up making a game called Dawn Seekers, in fact, that I made the mistake of building a game that was too big and got sort of lost in the weeds a little bit. I think we sort of skipped a step where, we were trying to build this huge world that's very graphically rich. And I think we lost track a little bit about what was important. And so Downstream, which shared a lot of the DNA of Dawn Seekers, but was very much focused on some things that we thought were interesting, like, can you build a digital world that anybody can take part on? So it's a sort of like an MMO. It's a sort of shared world. But an interesting attribute of that was that the players could extend the functionality of the world, so they could introduce features by way of smart contracts. And that's what we would call permissionless composability, the idea that anybody can permissionlessly extend the game, provided that it adheres to the rules of the world. And that, I think, we're very familiar with games that are owned and operated by companies. That's their predominant model. But is there a type of game that you can create that is owned and operated by the people playing it instead? And I think that's a new idea. That's and Downstream is a very primitive version of that, but it shows that kind of experience is possible.
Something that I really liked about Downstream is there was a lot of discussions around, we're now creating these worlds, these autonomous worlds that live without the constraints or unshackled by any particular whim of any particular developer. But there was always a risk that was identified by members of the community of, if anything goes, nothing goes. Where if anyone is able to introduce a new weapon, the balance of the game goes completely the game doesn't mean anything anymore. It's a
Yes.
bit like playing Minecraft in creative world mode where it's great. You can build anything, but there's no strife, there's no challenge in a way. And I think you folks had a very smart way of building physics that were amenable to composability and customizability without, let's say, break the world or break the game, without anyone being able to introduce like the magical ore that allows you to just create the most overpowered sword in the game.
Yeah, there was, when you start to consider permissionless composability, by the way, fun in itself, right? Because this isn't something that you can generally do in games. So how do you permit an open environment where people can build without allowing them to do things that fundamentally break the game or unbalance the game? And our solution to that, as you say, what's generally called digital physics, is we wanted to make sure that people can't make a sword of 1,000,000 damage, or they can, but they're constrained by, they have to consider how to do that. And our solution for that was that the world emitted resources, and items built in the game needed to be made from those resources. So yes, you could build a sword of 1,000,000 damage, but it would probably take you 10 years to make one of them, because you would have to collect all the resources from the world, and it was only emitting resources at a fixed rate. So in a way, that was our way of restraining what was possible to be built, and the resources that were emitted into the world had different attributes, and those attributes would make their way into the things that were built. So certainly that, and we did that in a primitive sense, insofar as you could have attack, health, and durability, I think. But you can imagine there's things that might affect speed, or all sorts of things that could be emitted from the world. So I think it's a really interesting new design thought to consider. How do you allow people to build whatever they want while still restraining it in some way that doesn't break the game? So that was our digital physics system that seemed to work well.
It's leitmotif that we tend to see quite a bit in on-chain gaming, where as a game dev, it seems that you go from being the all-seeing god of everything, where you strictly tell people what they can do and there's the fixed path, and now you're more in a position where you give a set of rules, you give constraints, and with constraints come, oddly enough, freedom to create new things. But it's a fun evolution of your role in a way.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm confident that it leads to a different outcome than heavily curated worlds like Roblox, or if you allow people, if you're very sort of hands off, and you create an environment where me, as the person that might have originally made downstream, I have no ability to control what happens in downstream. And I think that's, I don't know what happens long term, but I suspect that it's different from the kind of results that you'd expect in a curated environment. And that's more feature than bug for me. But it presents some new problems. So we've created a world that is censorship resistant by design. So what happens if people are creating things in that world that you dislike, or illegal, or they find some way of breaking the game? So it certainly sets a new set of challenges. But I think it's, but they're all, as we spent more time building that game, we found solutions to all of them. And it takes you on a different path than a traditional game, different set of design constraints, different set of considerations. How do you build an economy that balances? Like, there's lots of challenges building a genuinely open game, but that feels like the job, to figure that stuff out.
I'm curious about how things work out at Playmint, because you folks are well versed in game design, and I'm curious about how you go around designing these things, unearthing their problems and addressing them?
Yeah, we have a very talented team here that have made lots of different kind of games in the past. These are, you mentioned the game Buzz earlier. Our lead designer is the same designer that worked with me on Buzz back in that time. So it's a set of people that we've worked together for a long time and understand how to solve problems in games and enjoy solving those. So I would say probably more than any other company I've been part of, we spend more time talking about how to solve these problems. I would say that a typical game, a PlayStation game or a mobile game, is 80% old game, 20% new game. Sure, it might look different and play in a slightly different way, but you're still leaning on a set of things that you've built in the past or you can see work in other games. So, and that 20% or whatever the number is makes it feel like a new game. But here, in building a fully on-chain game, an autonomous world, it really feels like 50-50 in all sorts of things, not just about game design, but also about economy and about technology and about legalities. Like there's a whole new set of things that you have to consider when building this kind of game. So we spend a lot more time talking about it. We spend most of our Thursdays talking about exactly this.
What was the most challenging thing that you've experienced in the Playmint adventure?
I think there's certainly a lot of technology challenges. Public blockchains are not really designed to run video games, and so persuading, building a game out of a set of smart contracts is certainly non-trivial. I think the honest truth is, for a lot of crypto games, is that a challenge is they're not finding the size of audience that they need to find right now. So I think that there are some genuinely interesting games that exist in fully on-chain games or Web3 games more generally, but they're not finding millions of players. The games industry is 3 billion players, and we're just not seeing the footfall in fully on-chain games or other Web3 games. And despite the fact there's some interesting ideas, without a quantity of players that sustains it, then that's probably the biggest challenge today.
What's holding back this nascent industry in your mind?
I think the games aren't good enough yet. Is the truth. I don't think. I understand we released a primitive version of Downstream, but I understand why we don't have millions of players in that yet. It's very primitive. I can talk about how at some level it's comparable with Roblox, but in terms of playability, it's some way behind. It's a much slower paced experience, and if you're used to seeing games run very quickly and the fluidity that you expect in Minecraft or Fortnite or FIFA, then those aren't present in fully on-chain games. I think there's maybe a difficulty because fully on-chain games has some genuinely new ideas that I think, when fully realized, would be really interesting to gamers, but they're not fully realized yet. And then you have another challenge with other games in the Web3 gaming category where I don't think their differentiating features are interesting enough. So So I think neither are really finding the audience. I think that we need to get games at parity with games in the traditional games industry while introducing some of these new ideas that seem exciting to us.
In a way, it's very self-explanatory. If we had a hit game, we'd have more people. And if we don't have 1 billion people playing on-chain games, it just means that factually the games aren't good enough, at least for them to play. And I think we can blame them all we want for not seeing the light, but it just means that nothing that has been produced so far was up to the standard in a way.
Exactly that. It's not good enough. And making a game that's good enough is non-trivial. It's really hard to make a great game. And then you have an additional challenge of building it with some new technology and trying out some new ideas. And I suppose a frame of reference might be Off the Grid, which is a game that has found some amount of traction. But there, I think people are playing it just because it's a good game. I think that the decentralized, there aren't a set of new ideas that are bringing players to that game. I think it's just a solid game. So in a way, like they've sort of failed successfully in that it's a game that's finding an audience, but not because it's doing anything different. It's just a great game. I think what I'd like to see happen is a game that introduces some new ideas that is at a polished level and production level that is enough to draw in audiences. And I've always said that Minecraft is not, or certainly when it was first released, was not a high production value game. It was pretty primitive, but it introduced some new ideas at a level that was tolerable to players. And they maybe looked past the blocky graphics because they had some fun new ideas there. I feel that that's possible with decentralized games, but we haven't got there yet. Truthfully, I don't think any game's got there yet. Otherwise, we'd be seeing a bigger audience.
It's a nice segue into what you folks are working on currently, which is Substream and Playerchains, which in my mind are a fantastic shot at actually solving these issues. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I talked about how downstream is a primitive experience. It moves, as you're moving your character around the map, it moves very slowly, and you don't have that sort of interaction between other players that you come to expect. It's there, but there's no sense of combat because you're moving so slowly,
or presence even.
Yeah, that's right.
It's the fun thing of it's like Twitch reflexes. I know you there because there's a mutual understanding that we share the same space. But when it's turn-based and I need to wait for a block, even if it's a few seconds, the magic kind of disappears. Yeah,
and it is possible to create strategy games or board game type experiences, but they're not, they're not particularly popular, that kind of experience. And another challenge that we found is that it shouldn't be the case, but seems to be the case, just by building something that lives on a public blockchain with assets that are available on a public blockchain very much draws in an audience that expects to be able to speculate on the game. And I think that people that are looking at blockchain games, an audience of blockchain games are expecting to be able to speculate on it. And for a more traditional gamer, let's say, that other 3 billion group of players, they see blockchain games with some amount of suspicion, assuming that they're going to be a speculation game. So even though technically there's no reason why you couldn't, why that's the case, culturally it seems that the audience that it attracts is one that expects to speculate. So in a way, there's two problems there. One is this speculation one that I just mentioned. The other one is that the kind of game experience that you can build is somewhat limited if you're building on a public blockchain, which is what we've been doing. So we asked ourselves whether there was a different approach that we could take, and our solution was, rather than to run on a public blockchain like a layer 2, instead was to create a blockchain from the people playing the game. And we've ended up, fully on-chain games, it almost follows a client-server model. The client is the players and the server is the blockchain. And instead we said, that seems unnecessary if we can just build a blockchain, a peer-to-peer blockchain between the group of players. And in doing so, then we can avoid gas fees, so there's no gas fees to pay, and we can have very, very fast transaction times because it's just sending inputs between players. And we created a a game, Substream, as you say, that just proves that this system works, proves to ourselves and to anybody else that, hey, there's different ways of approaching decentralization that doesn't involve a public blockchain. And we think that maybe that's a more suitable approach for games because it reintroduces a performance that players expect and takes away something that might be confusing to play in the form of gas fees.
You say blockchains between players, and I mean that's why you call them player chains. Technically, they're, if I remember correctly, they're players. Like if 6 people are playing Substream, have 2 like it's a free for all, and everyone is just sending their inputs to everyone else and signing them. So you folks are creating a graph, an append only graph that with causal ordering in a way.
Yes.
So you just know that this thing happened before this thing, but there is no fixed sense of time or, let's say, very hard consensus. And to me, that would be maybe one thing that separates what you're building from a traditional blockchain, which is a funny thing that was written in the Bitcoin white paper right at the beginning is, okay, we need something that tells time in a decentralized manner.
Yes.
We need something that ticks
Yes.
forward. And it's funny, Bitcoin is a clock, it's a decentralized clock.
Yes.
And it was really difficult to build because you need to make sure that this thing came before this other thing. But what you're doing here is, I would say, a little bit different. It's quite similar, but also a bit different because you do not need that strict global ordering. You just need to know what came before the other.
Yes.
And it's coherent. And it's very reminiscent. I still do play a lot of Super Smash Bros. Melee, like an old GameCube game, which was abandoned by Nintendo. And there was just no multiplayer. And one dude came up with a team of people and said, oh, I'm going to build a multiplayer mod for this on the Dolphin emulator.
Yep.
And it works like peer-to-peer. And that was my first foray into, oh, damn, actually you can build peer-to-peer multiplayer experiences that are like fantastically fluid because you do not have this client-server model where you have to do like the way back and forth. It was rollback based netplay, which was like very, very fast. And while I was playing Substream with the Playmint team, I experienced some of the rollbacks that you experience also as well, where my ship was like next to a little border and then I like quickly clipped on the other side of it.
Yeah.
I think that's like a normal trade-off from the system that you're doing. Like some things glitch out, but it's okay. It's a bit like blockchains are very Newtonian, where everything follows a very clear path, everything is very orderly, and you're more into the quantum fuzzy state of, okay, something are gonna like fuck up at some point, but it's okay. It just allows you to go very fast and deliver a good experience.
Yeah, these are not new ideas for the games industry, the idea of rollbacks. I think it's, you talked about a clock. One of the things that we found missing in the EVM ecosystem was a tick. This is something that you build games around, and in traditional games, and the absence of a tick caused a lot of headaches in game design and how we built downstream. We had to sort of use a bunch of hacks in order to solve something that is just considered part of the system in the traditional game.
That's it for part 1 of the Hylé Podcast with David Amor from Playmint. We'll see you in January for the second half of this conversation.